listen to that. And my rule that I like to do is I do one thing a day that scares me. And so if you're trying to break out of old habits, make friends with fear. I don't want to say conquer fear, because fear will always be with you. And this is like spoiler alert. You will never conquer fear. You will never overcome fear, because the more you evolve and expand, the bigger your callings become, the bigger the service is that you're being asked to engage in. And so it doesn't get less scary. What you develop is just the capacity to feel the fear and do it anyways. And that is called courage. To being untouchable and unfuckwithable, because you're like, I got this, I'm gonna figure it out. Like, that's one of my mantras too, is like, I'll figure it out.
Hello and welcome to the Real Success Show. I'm your host, Candice Mama. Today is one of those days that if you've been asking yourself, how do I become more intuitive? How do I live a life that I'm really congruent with, in alignment with, and that makes me happy? How do I leave the situation? And how do I start moving towards my dreams? Then today's guest is just for you. Her name is just Lindsay. She founded Alive and Awake, and she's going to speak to us about how to tap into our own universal guidance. Before I jump right into it, if you like this episode, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Now, without further ado, here's Lindsay. Lindsay, thank you so much for being on the Real Success Show.
Thank you so much, Candice. I'm so thrilled and honored to be here with you today.
I've been so looking forward to speaking to you because you are a transformational coach that lives in Costa Rica. How did you get to Costa Rica? I think that is the dream. Oh, no.
I am, and I do, and I am so blessed and feel so grateful every single day that I get to get up. And this country of Costa Rica, my soul home, has been so transformational for me as a place, as a culture, as an experience that I've brought it back to my transformational coaching work, even when I was coming down as a tourist, and having lived here full time for the last 5 years, and being able to now bring my leadership coaching clients down here on private and group retreats, leadership team retreats, the integration of the country and the culture and the transformational work. And I'm actually creating a community down here that is going to be completely centered around transformation and activation. I just feel so blessed every single day to have the integration of all these different passions and my purpose all happening at once.
I love that. And talking about your purpose, Lindsay, where did this all stem from? Did you grow up and you were like, I'm going to be a transformational coach and I'm going to live in Costa Rica? How did you get here?
I'm laughing because none of this was remotely on my list of things I thought I would do or be. I didn't even know that any of it existed, to be honest with you, when I was growing up. I grew up in a small town in Northern Ontario in Canada. And I grew up in kind of a blue collar town in a medical family. My dad is a physician. My mom was a stay-at-home mom and kind of a mother figure to everyone in the community, very much a nurturer. And so I think in hindsight, I grew up in a family of service, and in a small town where community was important, connection was highly valued. It was in nature. We were a big skiing family and a cottaging family, so boating and water sports. So a lot of the values that I have and the lifestyle that I live now, I can draw full circle back to my childhood, but it wasn't a direct path. It wasn't a linear path. I actually followed a very traditional, I would say, path. I went to an elite business school and was very academically focused. And from business school, went into management consulting, strategy, very corporate, very, sort of on the path to going to, a Harvard or INSEAD for an MBA, like very predictable A-track kind of life. And what happened was that I showed up in this, I won the game. I showed up in this life and realized that I felt numb and empty. And I thought, is this it? Like, is this what winning the game is all about? And for me, I had the privilege of having grown up in a family that was very purpose-driven, service-oriented, very focused on, on life and family and passion and sports and activities. So it didn't feel normal for me. It felt out of alignment. And so from there, I started to do a lot of deep inner work. I always am my own first and most important client. My own self-inquiry started when I was in my mid-20s, early to mid. Truthfully, it started years and years before that. I've always been drawn to wisdom traditions and was always reading and learning about leadership since I was literally a child. It's funny now I look back, I was like this little woman child, this little old soul in the body of a 10-year-old. But so in some ways, yes, it's been my entire life, but not consciously. And so the titles of leadership coach and the physical location of Costa Rica, I had no connection to. I stumbled upon those things as the best things in life happen unexpectedly, intuitively. And in both of those, the career transition into coaching, which was in 2002, it was, when coaching was in its infancy, it was very fringe and kind of weird. And, people didn't know what it was. The whole emotional intelligence, positive psychology, all of these things were in their infancy. And so I felt vulnerable, even exploring it, never mind going into it and being one of the pioneers in the industry. It was for me, it felt risky coming from a very corporate academic background. Now it's so mainstream and so celebrated. And so it's just, it's so delightful for me to be like, finally, I was like sort of that crazy Mary, the Pearl Jam song, like that crazy lady in the corner talking about purpose and, mindfulness in corporate settings in like 2002, 2003. And now it's cool and trendy. So, and the research, most importantly, is there to support how powerful these tools are and these approaches are. And so that's exciting. And then Costa Rica, I literally just came here on vacation with my husband at the time and our firstborn baby for a surf camp, and just had this instantaneous knowing, full body, full soul, knowing that I belonged here in this specific town in Costa Rica. And from there on, that's been a trend in my life. And the same with coaching. I just know when I know. And that's some of the work that I really do with my clients, is teaching them how to tap into that inner knowing, that intuition, the instinctive, full body intelligence of physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually receiving data and exchanging information. And so from there on, Costa Rica became this real pillar in my life. I came on vacation every year. We had no money. We were in tech startups and I was an entrepreneur. So I would scrape together every cent I had to rent the most inexpensive house I could find. And my husband wasn't able to travel so much because he was building tech companies. So I would come alone with my kids. I had eventually 4 kids, and they would be babies and toddlers and just naked on the beach. And I just wanted them to have a similar experience that I had growing up, which was being wild in nature, unstructured, freedom, boredom, family time connecting through adventure sports. For us, it's surfing down here, and at the cottage, it's more, wakeboarding and surfing behind the boats. But there were a lot of parallels, and we were living in downtown Toronto in the concrete jungle. And I always felt like kind of a wildcat trapped in this concrete jungle. And so I felt most at home, ironically, not in Toronto, in my home country, but I felt far more at home in the culture and the environment of this tiny Costa Rican town. It felt much more aligned to the small town and life that I grew up with. So that's been my journey there.
What a journey. I mean, you touched on so many things, and I want to unpack each of them. But I want to go back to the space where you said you were feeling numb. You'd achieved the success or perceived success, yet you didn't feel whole. You didn't feel as though that's where you belonged. When you were in that space, Lindsay, how did you navigate your way out of it? Because that's where a lot of people find themselves in today's climate. And they're just like, I don't know how to get out of this. How did you get out of this?
To me, that is such an important question. And I agree with you. I think especially in the current global situation, many people are having, I consider it an opportunity, an awakening. It can feel like a shattering. And for me, it definitely did. But as all of the best expansions, activations, transformations in my life and those of my clients, they often come in the form of an initial shattering. It feels like a dissolution or a breaking down of what everything we thought we knew. And so the first thing I would say is, if you're able to be in that experience, but not of that experience, so just simply witnessing the truth of what you're going through, that's step number one. So I have actually this 4-step model that I created that I feel called to share right now. Number one, I call it witness and feel. So just witness what's happening for you. Feel the feelings, the anxiety, the numbness, the depression, whatever it is that's true for you. Try not to ignore it. Try not to numb it out, distract. I really, really am a huge fan of, my friends call me the cave dweller, because I'm a huge fan of shadow work and of clearing our shadows and the transmutation of the darkness to the light. That is like the definition of enlightenment. By going through it. We can't go around it. We can't I am statement our way out of anything, in my opinion. I'm a fan of, there's a time and a place for affirmations, but there's also a time and a place to get real with what's really happening. And so if you're feeling depressed, anxious, I really recommend that you acknowledge it, witness it, feel the feelings, and let the emotions inform you. There's great wisdom in sadness. There's great wisdom in anxiety. And ask those emotions. And I have many, many different tools and ways to guide people through this. Like, what is it trying to tell you? What's the contrast that you're living? What is not working for you? What do you desire? In the numbness or the anxiety or the depression or the sadness, what's not working for you that gives you the information about what you do desire, what would work for you. So I recommend, and some of the ways we do that are by being present to you and allowing for the information from our physical bodies, emotional, spiritual, energetic bodies, listening to the physical sensations, the emotions going through us. The second step is acceptance. I think a lot of us want to bury our heads in the sand. I know I did. It's like, not like plugging your ears, like, no, I don't want to know this. I don't want to know this inconvenient truth that potentially my entire career that I worked my whole life to create is no longer a fit for me, or this marriage that I put 20 years into is no longer in my highest good. That is not or this country that I was born and raised in is no longer the place where my soul feels most alive. These truths can be very confronting and can be very, scary and even ugly. Having to look at the truth of who we've become, potentially what we would judge as the ugly truth of who am I right now, and how am I behaving, or how am I showing up in the world? So acceptance, there's a huge practice of, I say, it is what it is, now what? It's happening, this thing, whatever it is. And as soon as we can stop resisting it, denying it, trying to suppress it, numb our way out of it, distract our way out of it, that's the path to freedom. So then the third step would be meaning making meaning of what's going on around us. And so that's where we really start to get the lessons, look for the blessings, start to take stock of what's happening, and really start to gather the information and the wisdom that can guide us into the fourth step, which is really taking inspired actions, making changes, using our life experiences as art. I always say life is art. So maybe you launch as I did, I launched an entire coaching company because I felt so trapped and empty and betrayed by having followed being the good girl, checking off all the boxes that society had told me. I won the game, I did all the things I was supposed to do. And it didn't lead to happiness as I had been kind of programmed to believe it would. So that's when we can start. For me, I channeled that towards a life of service, of servant leadership, to try to help others to tap into their purpose and their passions so that they can live their most abundant, fulfilling lives. So that's an example of using your pain or your experiences to fuel, whether it's just literally your art and your contemplation of life, or potentially even your whole career or your life's work.
Oh, I love that. And I resonate with it because it's so similar to my 4 steps, which is acknowledge, accept, allow, and release. So that's what I tend to teach, which is, and it's so interesting to me when you speak about it, how often we don't want to, as you call it, witness, and I call it acknowledge, how we don't want to witness our pain. We're so afraid of our pain, Lindsay. Like, why do you think people are so afraid of acknowledging the fact that they are in actual pain at that time?
Yeah, this is such a big question, and I'm nodding away with you because it hurts. It's not fun, right? I think it's a very normal response to not want to, have to go into something. I think of it like a Pandora's box, where it's like, if you lift the lid off that thing, and it's been my experience and that of mostly every person I've ever worked with, that initial wave can feel like a tsunami, that wave of sadness, grief, anxiety, fear, anger, rage, whatever it is that you're releasing that might have been, carefully bottled up for your whole life, or even generations, if there's stuff that has been passed down through you. It can be scary. And I want to acknowledge that. The reason people don't want to go there is because it's scary and it's not fun. So that's the work that I feel that we're called to do as leaders and as transformational coaches, is to create the container of safety so that they feel held. And I have, as I'm sure you do, many, many tools to help guide people through that journey. So they don't have to be like, I think of it like the cenotes, in Mexico, there's this whole underwater kind of cave system. And if you're in there by yourself, it can feel very scary and daunting. But how I see it is that I have a flashlight and I know some of the pathways because, I've done a deep immersion in a lot of these shadow spaces. I have tools. We have ancient wisdom traditions. We have positive psychology. We have all these amazing navigational tools that we can support people with. And ultimately, people need to develop, one of the tools is to develop the ability to feel comfortable being uncomfortable, and to develop the capacity to sit in discomfort and to, again, witness it, focus more on the sensations versus the judgment of whether it's good or bad feelings or emotions or any of those things, because it gets easier over time. And that's what I wish that I could share with everybody, is like, if you have the courage, it's like jumping off a dock into a cold lake. That first second is just like, oh, and then all of a sudden you get used to the water, and all of a sudden it feels really enjoyable. And I'm at the point, and this is where you get to, and it sounds a bit twisted in a way, but it's total freedom, where you can actually get to the point, which is where I'm at, where I delight in triggers. I delight in moments where I feel the darkness or the shadows, because it gives me the opportunity to explore an area that needs to be explored. And I know now, because I've done it so many times and guided so many people through it, that going through the darkness or the pain or the density of emotion is the direct path to freedom. Because once I think of it like density, like once we put space and air and awareness and love and compassion and transmutation into it, it no longer has that grip on us. So I feel, it's the same as the cenote analogy, is like, you might have to swim through that dark cave for a while, but once you emerge on the other side is where you find the crystal palace of light and vibrancy and radiance, and you're free of your fears, and you're free of your whatever it might be, kind of ancestral programming or societal programming, or the monkey mind, or the shackles of any of the programming and conditioning that we may have received.
Oh, that's such a beautiful way to look at it. And you speak a lot about, drawing your inspiration from ancient wisdom and psychology. What are some of the ancient wisdom traditions or philosophies have you come across that inform your work today?
I stumbled into yoga as a 19-year-old at university when it was not cool. It was like old ladies in unitards in their basements, and like everything in my life, I'm like way ahead of the curve doing it when it is not cool. I'm the like nerdy girl doing all the weird things. Luckily, Lululemon came along and made it cool about 10 years later, but it didn't matter. For me, yoga has been my medicine. It has been my lifeline, my greatest teacher. I have been blessed with so many incredible teachers, ancestral teachers. So yoga has been probably I grew up in a United Church of Canada, which is a Christian based. So I had that foundation as a starting point. And Jesus, to this day, I'm not religious at all. I don't consider myself religious, but Jesus is an iconic leader through history who I actually, in a lot of my visualizations, I tap into the wisdom of Jesus and Mary Magdalene as a kind of divine union, as spiritual guides for myself. And then I came upon yoga and the yogic traditions, the science of yoga, along with that, the Hindu mythology that is the lineage that I was trained in all my teacher trainings, super potent and powerful, and very parallel to a lot of the archetypes from, different modern psychology lineages, et cetera. And then Buddhism goes often hand in hand with a lot of the yogic practices. So I have been studying, Buddhism really since I was an early teenager. I remember my mom bought me Taoism. She bought me a book, The Tao of Pooh, Winnie the Pooh, when I was like 14 or something. I was reading Marianne Williamson and all these things when I was like 14, 13. And so those have been informative. The Course in Miracles is something that I really love. Marianne Williamson's work is another framework and philosophy that I really, really buy into. Pema Chodron. I'm a huge, huge lover of Ram Dass, his teachings, and that's based, I think, very much in the yogic traditions as well as psychology and Buddhism. So I don't really align myself, identify with being on anything, a Christian, a Buddhist, any of those. I consider myself to be a lifelong learner and a student and a liver of life. And I consider my life to be a giant social experiment. And I am a voracious learner, and I'm always out on the fringes of the human experience. And I see it as my purpose. Part of my purpose is to go out and explore all of it, whether it's through experiential life experiences, academically, through these wisdom traditions. I just follow my intuition about what books to read, what teachers to align. And I really look for resonance. And my thing that I look for always are patterns and commonalities. And what I've observed is the more that I learn, the more commonalities I see, that there are really only maybe 5 to 7 core universal truths. And when we study any lineage, and even now, modern science, research, academia are just sort of I'm thanks for showing up at the party, science. They're just now validating and proving a lot of these principles that the ancient wisdom traditions have been espousing for literally thousands of years, and human nature and human behavior has been for all of human history. So for me, they're one and the same, the spirituality and the science. I have yet to find any place where there's a disconnect or a misalignment. And so my scientific academic brain just loves the validation and the reaffirmation that science and research, evidence-based research, can provide. I'm far enough along in my journey and life that I don't need it anymore. But when I was younger and more less trusting, I had less experience. I needed that validation. Now I don't. Now I just think it's fun to see when science pops in and says, yeah, this thing that whoever the yogis or the Buddhists or whoever Christians or whoever the, Sufis or whoever have been saying for thousands of years, they're right. And you're like, okay, thanks.
Oh my gosh.
Thanks for showing up.
I love that. That is so cool. Every time you said thanks for showing up, it just made me smile. You speak about, this beautiful body intuition. You mentioned it at the beginning of your story, and you mentioned it again now. What is that for people? Sometimes I hear things like women have a stronger sixth sense, or, trust your gut or trust your intuition. Firstly, what is that to you? How do you define that sensation? How do you define that feeling?
That is such a great question. I believe that everybody has amazing intuition. I do believe, if we're generalizing, it has been my experience that women may have less of a veil between ourselves and the intuition, but I think every man has massive access also. I don't think it's a gender, but I think that because genetically, nature, nurture, because we're so having to be in tune with our bodies because of our cycles, because of birth, there's a natural women's socialization and maybe genetic makeup. I don't know. I'm not an expert on those, what comes from nature or nurture, our propensity to be in communication, in social gatherings, etc. Those are all, I think, connected to nature, connected to energetic information, etc. For me, intuition is it's that sense of just knowing something, and it can be it can be physical, mental, emotional, energetic, spiritual. I don't have a specific. I think it's all of the above. And I think some of the ways that you can start to tap into that are becoming, that's one of the gifts for me of an embodiment practice like yoga. It could be martial arts, it could be dance, it could be any modality. I don't have any attachment, but developing that connection to our bodies and the ability, the listening. It's really a listening is what how I would articulate it. And through the listening, whether it's through, I get butterflies in my stomach, I get goosebumps, I get knots in my stomach when something doesn't feel good, I get a tightness in my throat when we can start to develop an intelligence about our bodies are infinitely intelligent. And this comes from evolution. We needed to survive in jungles and forests and deserts. And those of us who've made it this far evolutionarily, it's because we developed the capacity in our nervous systems, in our sensory systems. And we're just now, science, to our earlier point, is just now coming through with even newer information about the gut brain, the heart brain, and the head brain. We're just now understanding, when we say trust your gut, the level of intelligence and the nervous system complexity and brilliance that's happening literally in our guts. And they're connecting that to foods that we're eating, to the different, chemicals and hormones that get released, like the endorphins and the serotonin and the dopamine and all these things we historically thought were in our brains, which are really some of the communication tools of our intuition and our wisdom. We're just now, so I don't know the exact answer of what it is scientifically. I can say how it shows up for me is in a sense of I just know when I know, or I know when it's not right. And I think it can show up, as I said, in many different, for some people, it may be auditory. I get a lot of information. I hear sentences in my ear, or I hear a song lyric, or I get guidance. I'm at the point now where I'm in such a listening, receptive state all day, every day, that I'm receiving guidance all day, every day. It's not like I just go meditate for 20 minutes, get a download, and I'm like, hey, good. I'm literally walking down the street and I hear something in my ear, or a song lyric plays on the overhead, or I get an instinct, a thought to call someone, and all of a sudden they call me right back. It's this kind of listening that we can develop the capacity to tune into. And what it almost always requires is that we need to lose our minds. We need to shut off our brains, because I believe that the logical mind should be a servant of the heart and the soul and the body, not the dictator trying to tell everybody what to do. Because often our intuition seems nonsensical, or in my case, usually very insane. Like, why would I do that? That's crazy. There's no way I should do that. And our minds and our egos will jump in to try to keep us safe and keep things predictable and familiar. So I think that intuition often flies in the face of logic. It flies in the face of reason. So if most of the people I work with, and myself in my earlier years, are so cognitively centered, intellectually centered, analytically, strategically, whatever it is, in your head, that might be something you need to address to get into your body. And so when I talk about intuition being embodied, it's because it's my experience that a lot of the intuitive information is accessed through the sensations and the knowing that we can have. Some of us physically, like I said, it could be auditory, it could be visual. You get images or visual visions of things, paying attention to synchronicities, to any kind of signs or signals that are meaningful to you. And really just listening and trusting that we're being guided in every moment, whether it's by your highest self, a higher power, whatever your belief system is. There's infinite intelligence there for us. And I like to say, and this is kind of a universal truth for most, wisdom traditions, like, I know nothing. I really know nothing. I'm just like, every time I think I know how my life is supposed to unfold, or what I think I'm supposed to be doing, I get a complete, sidetrack, or the universe just throws some massive shift in my way, or a turn of events, or a plot twist that I had no idea was coming. So I think that for me, the work is really about, I call it in taking inspired action, listen and leap, all day, every day. Just listen through, whether it's your meditation, your movement practices, quiet time, journaling is a huge way. Listen to what's being asked of you and given to you. And from that, we leap, we take action. But it's a very micro process, and very iterative, really literally minute to minute, hour to hour. In my case, But it used to be, I used to make like 10-year plans. And now I have intentions and I have directions I'm heading in, but I'm constantly tweaking literally all day, every day, you know? And there's a balance about planning and having that linear path, and at the same time, having the flexibility to be dancing in the moment of what's showing up.
Wow, it sounds like you're in such a beautiful state of trust, I'd say, trusting that there is a higher truth and that there is something that is going to lead you in the right direction. For people who
Yes.
listen to you and they say, how do I know what's the difference between fear and intuition? Is how do I know if this is something that I'm resisting because of something that has got nothing to do with this actual sequence of events, or if it's something that I'm actually supposed to be doing? So how do people differentiate between the two feelings, fear versus intuition?
I love this question. This is so good. First of all, somebody was sharing this the other day, and I want to repeat it. I wish I could tell you exactly who it was, but I consume so much inspiring content. But fear in and of itself is not bad. There's a time and a place for healthy fear, because sometimes life happens and puts us in a situation that is not safe. So I feel that we can get very anti-fear, and I don't believe that any human emotion is innately good or bad. This is one of the Hindu myths that I heard in one of my yoga teacher trainings from Noah Mazay, who's one of my great master teachers. And he shares a lot of the Hindu mythology. He talked about this myth about the churning of the Milky Ocean, and that we're all fish and beings in this ocean. And a human emotion or a human experience can either be nurturing, like a smaller fish that's feeding us and allowing us to live, or it can become predatory, like a giant shark coming to eat us. And so when we look at fear, I would say, is it a healthy fear? Is it giving me information that there may be risk? There may be something I need to pay attention to, keeping my senses alert. And I would say, pay attention to those fears, write them down, look at them, assess them. And from there, start taking calculated risks. Where fear becomes toxic or consuming or predatory is when it takes over our minds, I would say, in the form of rumination, in the form of anxiety, in the form of worry. And so that's why simply writing them down, for example, or speaking them out loud can help us to take them from this predatory, toxic state into something very informative and practical. Like maybe I don't actually have enough money to quit my job right now and go start my company, or maybe I actually, traveling right now to that country when there's a massive military coup on, maybe that's a viable thing to, maybe I should pivot and go to a slightly different country just now until that military coup is completed or whatever. So looking at your fears, that's a time when our logical mind can help us to be rational and not let the fear consume us, but to map on our logical minds and our analytical and our research. Maybe I do more research. Maybe I make some calls. I was going to go to Peru this summer, and I had an intuition. I called my girlfriend who's from Peru, and she's like, there's a massive uprising right now. There's a change in government. There's some terrorist attacks. I wouldn't recommend you go right now. Wait 6 months. And I'm like, good to know. That's a reasonable fear when somebody is like, there's high risk. Versus I'm sitting in the same job for 20 years and I hate it, and my mind is just scared to make a change. And so I would differentiate it based on, is it consuming you? Is it rumination? And some of the signals you might know of whether it's toxic fear, let's call it, or intuition. Intuition and higher guidance tends to come in clear, concise, literally 3 to 4 word sentences. And it can sound like marketing slogans. It's usually directive. It's usually like no bullshit, to the point, like just do it. It's time to go. Walk on, call them, write it. It's that kind of, and there's no noise around it. And sometimes it can come on repeat. Sometimes I get song lyrics that come, and it will be like one line of a song and I can't get it out of my head for like 2 hours. And I've learned that that's one of the ways that my intuition speaks to me. And so those are some versus toxic fear, which might be, it's very chattery. Yeah, but what if this, and what if this, and then there's this, and then there's that, like chirping birds in your mind. That's usually when you're getting the monkey mind. Our anxiety, our fear, our rumination sounds messy and clouded. Our intuition and our highest wisdom sounds direct, bossy sometimes, clear, and there's no drama around it. Just do it. It's time to go. Whatever it might be. Let It Be. That song, Let It Be by the Beatles.
Yeah.
I was in the middle of a massive relationship transition about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was in such turmoil, and that song just kept playing over and over, and I was uncertain about what to do. And that was an example where that song was like literally 3 months, and I'm like, enough already. Like, okay, I get it. But there was wisdom in there. It was like, just let it be. Like, there's nothing more to do. It's, and so intuition can sound almost cheesy, like a love song, or, but those are those universal truths, like choose love, walk on, whatever. Imagine like it's like a bumper sticker, intuition can sometimes come in like the form of a bumper sticker.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I love hearing all the different examples you gave, because I know for myself, if I'm really seeking guidance and I'm trying to access my intuition, I'll literally shuffle my playlist. I will speak to my intuition and be like, I need you to say something. And then I'll like shuffle a song. And it sounds crazy, but at the most random time, I'll forget I put the playlist on. I hear something and I'm like, whoa, I've listened to the song like 20 times and I've never, ever, 200 times, and I've never, ever heard these words. And all of a sudden, it's like the answers come to you. Coming to this place where you are, Lindsay, where you come across as very balanced, you come across as very secure and faith-led, like in the sense of you trust your life, you trust yourself. It takes a long time to formulate habits that get you to that place. So for people out there who are in chaos, they're living in a space where they're like, Lindsay, my mind won't shut up. I am in a place where I don't even like myself right now. Where do they begin? How do they start taking the first steps to changing where they are?
I'm nodding. I can so relate because I was there. I had chronic anxiety my whole life. That's why I got into yoga, was because I had such debilitating anxiety. I had perfectionism to the point of like self-destruction. I had such fear and shame around failure. This is in my teens and early 20s before I found some of these modalities in this work. So I can totally relate. I would come home from every party I was at and wake up the next morning horrified by like, did I offend someone? What did I do? And I overachieved to such an extent that it literally, I pushed myself to such extremes, professionally, academically, physically, through exercise, through all these things, because I was so terrified and living in such anxiety and this fear of lack of control. So I tried to compensate by trying to control everything around me, not everyone, luckily, although maybe some every now and then I did. But for me, it was about controlling circumstances. So if I got the best job, I couldn't be fired and there was low risk there. If I planned everything meticulously, if I was so structured and so everything, maybe I'd be safe. And so I totally relate to that. And the rumination that comes with chronic anxiety was something that I didn't even know wasn't normal. I was like, well, isn't this how most people live? And that's when I luckily intuitively stumbled onto, for me, it was the practice of yoga. And in my massive amounts of study of yoga, one of the things I came across is the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And it's one of the sort of core texts of yoga. And the second sutra is that the purpose of yoga is to quiet the mind stuff. So a couple of ways to just get started on this journey, I would say, is listen to your intuition. I say follow the good juju. That's another way I say listen to your intuition. If you feel curious about whether, again, it's a movement practice or a book you might want to read or a teacher or a podcast, start to pay attention, because you're being guided to whatever teachers or guides are meant for you on your path. There is no prescription, there's no recipe, there's no, connect the dots of anybody's journey. But what you want to start to learn is to develop the trust of your inner knowing, and how that can look initially is just follow your curiosity. Like if you're in a bookstore, I don't know if people go to bookstores anymore. I love bookstores, but I don't know. We don't even have any where I live, but pretend you went to a bookstore, if people still do that. It's like, what's that book that's jumping out at you from the thing, and grab it. Or if somebody, I have a rule of threes. If I hear 3 people mention a book in a like short period of time, Okay, I'm like, okay, got it, noted. The most recent one is Radical Awakening by Dr. Shefali. I've had literally 6 people be like, you have to read this book. I'm like, it's literally on my Kindle right now, ready to be read. So listen to what's being brought to you in your circle of awareness. If you're walking by a yoga studio every day and it's like, or a martial arts class or a running group or whatever, a swimming club or anything, listen to that. And my rule that I like to do is I do one thing a day that scares me. And so if you're trying to break out of old habits, make friends with fear. I don't want to say conquer fear, because fear will always be with you. And this is like spoiler alert. You will never conquer fear. You will never overcome fear, because the more you evolve and expand, the bigger your callings become, the bigger the service is that you're being asked to engage in. And so it doesn't get less scary. What you develop is just the capacity to feel the fear and do it anyways. And that is called courage. So the way that we develop courage, which ultimately leads to confidence, because once you do enough scary things and either succeed at them or figure out how to deal with failure, again, that's your path to freedom. That's your path to ultimate empowerment, to being untouchable and unfuckwithable, because you're like, I got this, I'm going to figure it out. Like, that's one of my mantras too, is like, I'll figure it out. So, the more that I expand and the greater my capacity gets to hold space through my own expansion, the bigger the challenges and the opportunities and the projects become, whether it's the inner work that we're now being asked to engage in, the shadows we're being asked to look at, which can become ancestral, they can become collective. Once you clear out your own shit, it's like, okay, now you're going to clear out your ancestral stuff, and now you're going to look at what the whole collective is, and you're like, what? And so it doesn't get easier, but what you develop are the capacity to live with fear, to have the tools. And I really highly recommend journaling, number one. If you don't journal, even if you've never if you're resistant to it, just try it. I've had so many people say that it has profoundly changed their lives, and it's just could be 5 minutes a morning, pick up a pen, and there's many tools out there. I like to just do stream of consciousness, just let my mind empty. If you're having ruminations or worries or fears, you might say, right now I am telling myself, or right now I am feeling, and let it pour out. That's one tool. Starting to, like I said, pay attention to what has resonance is another way. Is like, I'm drawn to this person, to this book, to this music, to this song. Pay attention to that. And ultimately, just a lot of the wisdom traditions talk about developing a witness consciousness. Untethered Soul is a great book that talks about that concept in a way that I think is very accessible, to start to, as I said earlier, to be in this place, but not of this place. So you can be in a situation, in an emotional state, but starting to be able to, you can use emotional labeling or, tapping into your highest self. There's some great visualizations to just start to observe where you're at and what your habits or patterns or practices may be at this moment. And that's when you can start to not be, again, consumed by or feel a victim of life or your mind or your history or whatever. And you can start to be the player, like the one that's in the drama, but also the director of and the audience for what you're experiencing.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And talking about the rule of 3, you are the 3rd person to mention untethered soul. So clearly that's a message for me. For our audience that is parenting right now, that are going through this global situation with kids, and they're saying, Lindsay, how do you do it? How do you raise conscious, beautiful, but strong kids into the world? What do you say?
I'm laughing because my kids are so strong and they're teenagers now. And I'm always joking. I'm like, careful what you wish for, because when they're strong kids, my kids are amazing and they're brilliant. And I have not even an ounce of concern that they're all going to be global leaders. And so having 4 strong, fiery characters in your house is not boring. So my philosophy with parenting, and again, this was ahead of the curve. It was, my first was born in 2005, and I stumbled into some of these. Now they're calling it conscious parenting. At the time, I was really aligned with Adlerian philosophy around parenting, I had to reinvent, because I came from a generation where it was more kind of that command and control style of parenting, where you just kind of do what you're told, and I had to actually unlearn a lot of those pleasing, good girl type of imprinting so I didn't want my kids to have that experience, because I wanted them to just start out as who they authentically were, and to do my best to allow them to grow and thrive. And so the number one thing that I have always felt 100% clear on is that our kids are here to teach us. We are not here to raise children. I love this belief that we choose our parents and that our children choose us. I love the idea that we choose the exact parents to give us the exact karmic experience that our soul needs to evolve in this lifetime. Whether you believe in that or not, it's just a helpful perspective, because if you're in a family situation with your own parents and you're like, oh my God, like, why is this happening? They're crazy, or tragically very maybe dysfunctional or abusive, having the perspective that you chose it and that it's happening for you, not to you, can be helpful in terms of, I'm talking at the very spiritual level, very meta level, that there's Ram Dass talks about the curriculum of life, and that there's a reason. And I think if any of us reflect back on some of the most shattering or crucible moments of our life that might have felt the most painful or the most whatever, we can probably all find meaning in it and say that it crafted the character of who we are today, or it gave us this life experience that has made us who we are today. So with children, my mandate is to just get out of the way and let them be who they fully are. Obviously, when they're toddlers, you got to keep them out of traffic. My kids were wild. They were like the kids climbing on bookshelves at birthday parties, and the other parents are like, oh, are they okay? And I'm like, oh yeah, this is like, those are all four of my kids. Like, I didn't have a single one that would sit in color. I remember they were like, there's Super Nanny or thing was on TV when my kids were little, and she was like, just put your kid in timeout if they're being naughty. And so I tried it with my first one. I was like, okay, you're in timeout. She looked at me like I was crazy, and she just got up and ran across the room. She's like, why would I sit on the naughty stair when I can run away? And I was like, uh-oh, this is not working. So I believe in celebrating who each child is, and I see it as my job to advocate for them, to clear the system. And I've had to be very an advocate in schools with teachers, and doing my own work when I get triggered because of my issues. For example, when they were little and another kid would say like, do you want to come for a play date? And my kids are very free thinking. They're also very introverted, and there's four of them. So they actually don't love a lot of play dates because they're constantly surrounded by their siblings. So often they'd be like, no, I'm good. And I would be mortified. I'd be like, sweetie, I think you should just go. That's a nice little girl. And I really like the mom. And this pleaser in me was mortified that my kids had the courage to say, no, I'm not feeling a play date today. Instead of me trying to impose the niceness curse that I had onto them, I started to learn from them and be like, wow, what would that be like for me to just decline social events that I don't actually want to go to? And so seeing our kids as our teachers, at the same time, again, there's that sweet spot of letting them be who they are. But I also, obviously, for me, kindness is important. I've really nurtured in them independence, a sense of resilience. And so I think there's an integration or a balance between letting them be who they are, but also creating boundaries, and the way that I did that is by having them at least be involved if possible, or at least be aware of what the boundaries are, and then doing my best, and I fail at this every day, to be consistent in enforcing them. So it's like choices and consequences. And one of the major teachers I used to follow was Alison Schaefer. She's Canadian. She's a genius. I think she wrote Honey, I Wrecked the Kids and Ain't Misbehaving. Those are the only two parenting books I ever read. And it's a very Adlerian approach, which is very rooted in the coaching philosophy, which is Socratic, asking questions, giving them choices and consequences, and letting them know ahead of time. For example, we laugh about this now because my kids are 16, 14, 12, and almost 10. And I'm obsessed with them. They're so cute. If you want to see them, they're on my Instagram at Lindsay Alive. They just did a video. They make fun of me all the time. They're hilarious. They make fun of all my spiritual friends, and they do videos. They steal my phone and do videos. And I posted one the other day. But I think they're incredible and amazing. But we were just talking the other day, they all love to cook, and they're all, even my 9-year-old, she's almost 10. they cook like as well as I do. And we come from culinary, our families all love to cook. And they said, Mom, how did you make us such a good eater? Because a lot of, kids their age don't like different flavors or don't like sophisticated kind of palate things. And it was because when they were little, I would never make them special meals. I would make a curry, I would make whatever it was that we were eating. And I would always make sure there was something on the plate. Like, for example, if it was like a curry, which a lot of kids might find is strong in North America, I would make sure there was a little thing of rice on the side, that at the very least they could have rice or there would be something. But the choice and consequence was, this is the dinner that's being provided. And if you don't eat it now, you're going to have to wait till tomorrow morning to eat. And so we laugh about it because other parents I know, without naming names, they just like, their kids don't eat dinner and then they cook them another dinner at 9 o'clock at night, or they give them toast and whatever. And I'm not judging because everybody's like perfect. And I've certainly done it myself, but for me, eating a variety of food was important. And that idea that we eat when it's time to eat so that's an example of boundary setting with choices and consequences, but it's not like finish your food or you're not getting dessert. It was no power or control. It was a choice. They were empowered. You can eat your food or not eat your food. I'm not attached to that. One way or another, the food will be cleared at 7. And in every case, you're not getting another dinner at 9. So that's on you. That's your choice. And I empowered them, asking them questions versus telling them what to do. What do we need to do to get ready? And also, I feign incompetence all the time. I'm like, I don't know. What do you think we should do? I don't know. How should we get that doing? And getting them to think for themselves and advocate. And so I also would never go in and speak directly to teachers on their behalf. I would coach them and prepare them to go in and advocate for themselves. So now they're at 16 and 14 and 12 and 10. They're so confident to engage with the world and authority figures in a respectful way, but in an empowered way. And that was because I didn't spoon feed them. And I spoke to them as adults since they were infants in like the grocery store cart in their bucket seats. I'd be like, what apple should we get today? What are you thinking? Green or red? And I would just like start talking to them like they were humans. And I never saw them as separate from or something to be dealt with. I always saw it as a privilege and a gift to us, that we are gifted with the opportunity to learn from them and create the space for them to thrive. And also I fail all the time. I yell at my kids. I lose my shit, all the things. So I don't want to project this like perfect thing onto the world, because parenting, anyone who's a parent will know, it is the number one greatest teacher. Like, you will shatter your ego time and time again. And it's the journey of a lifetime. And just always do your best. And I do my best to clean up my messes when I make them, apologize when I screw up, take responsibility, hold space for the impact that we have on each other, and lead by example and especially lead by example in permission to be human and perfectly imperfect, because they're going to be perfectly imperfect parents someday, or adults someday also.
Oh, that is brilliant. I absolutely love that. And it was so informative. It's just so beautiful. And our last 2 rapid fire questions. Okay. So the first one is, what is real success to you?
Real success for me is living aligned with my purpose and my passions every single day, and being as present as I can to this incredible ecstatic dance of the human experience, just soaking it all in, soaking in the juice of life, squeezing the juice out of life, tasting it, letting it like run down my face. That's success for me.
I love that answer. And the final one is, what is one thing about Lindsay that we will not find on Google?
One thing you will not find on Google. I would say it would have to be the depth of the shadow work the inner work that I do. Is a very introverted, private part of myself that I don't share publicly until I heard Elizabeth Gilbert and Brene Brown on a talk show once talk about sharing from wounding versus sharing from scars. So I only ever share publicly from things that I've worked through and healed and made meaning of, that have no more energetic charge. So what you will never see from me on social media is my very private inner work that I'm constantly doing. And I'm voracious about chasing the next place of discovery and evolution for myself. But it's a very private part of my life that I share with a very sacred inner circle of teachers and healers and coaches and soul sisters and soul brothers. And it's my laboratory in my social experiment of my own life. And it's where I do my own my own work. And from that is what I then share out in the world.
Wow. Lindsay, this has been a beautiful, impactful, fun, energetic interview. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much, Candice. It's been such a delight. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, if you love this conversation with Lindsay, I know that you're going to love Forbes Riley. I spoke to her a few episodes ago, so you want to check that out. She shares how she manifested the life of her dreams through journaling and writing that Lindsay mentioned. Until next time, I look forward to seeing you again next week.